Hi, my name is Eric Cole and this is Film Talk. In this video we're going to talk about the latest and final installment in Daniel Craig's tenure as James Bond, No Time to Die, and the potential reason why the film's antagonist didn't leave the mark that some might have expected. After 4 delays and in the midst of a pandemic, No Time to Die was released in cinemas in September 2021 and managed to rake in over $770 million, making it the second highest grossing English-speaking film of that year, which is impressive especially considering the circumstances. And with an audience rating of 88%, it's safe to say that the majority of the people that have seen it had an overall good time with No Time to Die. And at 83%, the critics' rating was not far behind. But one point of contention that seemed to be mentioned a lot was the film's antagonist, Saffin. So let's talk about it. And before we start, little disclaimer, I will only be looking at the function that Saffin as a character serves within the film and the story. This is not a commentary on Rami Malek's performance as an actor. Also, spoiler warning. First, we need to look at what an antagonist is. In his masterclass, author Dan Brown describes an antagonist as the character working against the protagonist and creating the main conflict. Brown makes a distinction between different types of antagonists: the villain, the conflict creator, inanimate forces, and the protagonist themselves. In No Time to Die, Saffin fits in the conflict creator category, a character whose goals come in direct conflict with the protagonist. Bond and Saffin each have their own goals. It is the pursuit of their respective goals that puts them in each other's way. Bond wants to retrieve/destroy Heracles. Saffin wants to use Heracles. Bond wants a family with Madeleine. Saffin wants a connection with Madeleine. And the impact that the antagonist makes on the protagonist, and by extension on the audience, is relative to how difficult it is for the protagonist to best the antagonist. In his book, The Art of Dramatic Writing, Lahosegri writes, "If for any reason the antagonist cannot put up a protracted fight, you might as well find another character who will." During the third act of the film, Bond and Saffin face off in what is essentially a hostage negotiation for Madeleine. In order to assess how hard, how difficult that conflict is for Bond, let's take a look at what we know him to be good at by the time we get to that point in the film. Fighting, shooting, working under extreme pressure, smooth talking, and getting his way. Before we get to their face-off, we know and have seen that Bond has the required skills and some to either negotiate for Madeleine's release or shoot his way towards a resolution. So now the antagonist struggles to be a more significant threat or obstacle than anything else we've seen Bond deal with up until this point. And so Saffin's impact on Bond and on the audience isn't felt as much. And I would argue that had that conflict hinged on the things that we know Bond to be not so good at: trusting, expressing his emotions, apologizing. Yes, I know how that sounds, it's James Bond, but hear me out. See, the film presents the connection between Saffin and Madeleine. When he was a child, Saffin's family was killed by Mr. White, who is Madeleine's father. And when she was a child, Madeleine's family was killed by Saffin. And later on, the film explores that connection further by establishing that Saffin understands her pain and that he sees some of himself in her. He knows what it's like to be in her shoes. Now, the way that the actual film plays out, Madeleine ended up not wanting to do anything with Saffin. But what if the film ran with the idea that Madeleine also sees herself in Saffin? That she sees and on some level appreciates that he's the only one who can understand her, especially when Bond, the love of her life, the person she trusted the most, left her behind as soon as her family history started to resurface, and straight after them being chased and shot at. And what if the negotiation for Madeleine's release was in fact a struggle for Madeleine's soul, for her loyalties? Could Bond stop Saffin from turning Madeleine? Well, then Bond's smooth talking, fighting, proficiency at getting his way would be irrelevant. He would have to rely on the things that he's not so good at, i.e. trusting Madeleine, maybe apologizing, expressing his emotions. These attacks on Bond's weaknesses would make his conflict with Saffin much more difficult. Difficult enough that it would force him to change. And when you look at some of the most iconic antagonists, they too force their respective protagonists to change. In the Infinity Saga, Tony Stark's conflict with Thanos forced a self-centered man with a big brain to become a self-sacrificing father with a big heart. And in the Terminator, Sarah Connor's conflict with the T-800 forced a defenseless waitress to become an incredibly resourceful and fearless warrior. Stories, films, more often than not, will be about a protagonist going through changes, and an antagonist is a very effective way to force that change, but not necessary. In No Time to Die, James Bond goes from being a gun-toting hotshot who prefers to be alone to a father who values his family more than his life. But instead of the antagonist being the force behind it, Bond's change was brought along by something else: the death of his brother-in-arms, Felix, and more importantly, the arrival of his daughter, Mathilde. As a conclusion, an antagonist that forces the protagonist to change is more likely to leave a lasting impression, but some stories enact change in other ways, leaving them no time for a memorable villain. What did you think about No Time to Die? Have you seen it? If so, what did you think about the antagonist, and what do you think makes for a memorable villain? Drop a comment below and let me know. And before I go, well over a year ago, my team and I ran a crowdfunding campaign for my drama sci-fi short film called The First Time I Never Met You. Well, after a few delays and quite a few obstacles, we finally shot it and are now in post-production. So I want to give a big shout out and a massive thank you to everyone that supported and backed the campaign, to everyone that spread the word about the film, to our amazing cast and crew, and to everyone else that helped us along the way. You guys are all amazing. Thank you.